As it's past and I was running a bit late, so it's on me, to be fair. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Crown Pub. And today I'm going to hand over to my really good friend, Jean Lloyd. He's going to take over and carry on as long as she's got power in South Africa, because he's got a few issues over there. So without further ado, Jean.
Thank you. So you're my wingman always, Kelvin. So if I do run out of power or go blank, then you just carry on. But
I'll be here.
I'm sure my dear friend Pat can carry her own. So today my guest is Pat McGrew, who honestly don't think Pat needs any introductions because, Pat is a real print veteran. And I was just thinking about you earlier today, Pat, and I just thought that knowledge in that head, you must have every encyclopedia in there. I mean, you like the Google, where it's just everything's in there. I just want to pick that brain. I mean, it's like
I learn new things every day.
Isn't it amazing? And I tell you what, you are the go-to person almost for everything because, you've just had such a lot of different experiences. And I was thinking I've known you for 20-something years, which,
isn't that scary?
It's a bit scary. I was, trying to work out, and it must be over 20-something years. But over the last sort of 2-3 years, and I'm going to get you to introduce yourself now because maybe we should do that for those that don't know you. So I'll hand over to Pat McGrew, let her give you a bit of an idea who she is and where she comes from, in case you don't know her.
Yeah, so I have like the world's strangest background. I started in TV news like 35 years ago, Pat McGrew, TV4 Eyewitness News. I was more producer side, but I found much about that business. I had been taught by really great journalism professors and came, wide-eyed into that market and discovered it in the business practical reality of things. It wasn't quite what I expected it to be. So like it's often the case, right? You come out of university and you've got wide eyes and great ideas, and then you hit business and your life changes. So I wiggled my way through technical writing for archaeology companies, music magazines, business magazines, landed at a company that was building the first variable data printing for the insurance industry, where we were merging data into pre-composed documents in Metacode and AFP. Xerox and IBM printing systems, now Ricoh, for those of you who don't go back that far. After doing that for a few years, I ended up being asked to write a book, and I grabbed one of my colleagues to help me do that. And we wrote a book called In-House Publishing in a Mainframe Environment, because it was the very early days. I mean, we're talking, late 80s kind of time frame and into the early 90s. And the idea of being able to do publishing, WordPerfect was still new, Microsoft Word was basic. WordPerfect was sort of the tool of choice. Quark was new, we used all of the older, the Aldus tools. But on a mainframe, it was a little trickier. There were text composition tools on the mainframe. So we leveraged those, and we actually wrote the first book and had it, it was then, our file was handed to the typesetting company. The second time we updated the book, we actually worked with IBM Printing Systems to use their brand new untested PostScript emitter from their mainframe to publish the second version of the book. So 8 books later, I've changed jobs a number of times. I started a software company for 10 years, did high-speed printer data stream transforms. You had AFP, you wanted Metacode, we did it. You had Metacode, you wanted PCL, we did it. You wanted PDF in the early days, we did that. We were the OEM provider of that tool. Sold it, and then got bored really fast. So I ended up working for Infotrends for a little while, and then Pitney Bowes, rolling out a global document strategy. Then Kodak, launching the Kodak Versamark inkjet web press. Yes, 300 dots per inch of water-based inkjet. And then HP until 2016, came back to Infotrends, became Keypoint Intelligence. Congratulations, Jean. And left 2020, March of 2020, just as COVID started. They did a reorg, and I didn't have a job, so hung out shingle. And I've been just having a blast ever since. So Jean, you're right. I've got this really weird background because I've worked on the hardware side, toner, inkjet, high speed, sheet fed, offset, litho, flexo, the whole thing, but also worked the software side. So I play in a lot of areas, but became enamored with workflow starting back in my software days. So that's what we wanted to talk about today, sort of workflow automation, and wrap a little towards the end of this, wrap a little robotics into it.
Absolutely. So I just want to, Kelvin, we are recording because so many people really wanted to attend, but as the world is opening up and everybody's at exhibitions and shows and everything, everybody's like, please record, please record. So if we could, and we are, that's fantastic.
8 a.m. tomorrow, the recording will be up.
Your knowledge is wow. And I know you consult for so many businesses and advise the industry. And I've noticed so many of your posts in the last, I would say probably 2 years or such. It's automation, automation, automation. And there's no doubt that was one of the buzzwords when the pandemic hit. You had to automate, otherwise you were dead, basically. And you became the big, drive and push, automate your business, which kind of ties in with the conversation I think we're going into now. So on robots.
If you have automation already, you probably came through okay.
That's true.
But if you didn't, you probably started having unusual conversations with yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we're talking about robotics today, and I think it was a lot of it is actually being driven by the pandemic. Like I always say, the best thing to happen to digital print was the pandemic. But robotic, you're replacing, some of your, I mean, I don't want to say people because it sounds so terrible and everybody sort of cringes, but it's, you've got somebody that's standing in for people that aren't around, so kind of maybe let's get onto that conversation because, when we start talking robotics in a print shop, everybody goes, oh my gosh, don't talk about that because you're trying to get exactly, there's this big fear factor and everybody's sort of hiding away. Should there be
can I draw an arc? Can I draw an arc for everyone? Because I started thinking about how to approach the conversation. And can I share my screen real fast?
Yep, absolutely.
I think I can. So here's what I'm going to say to you. There is nothing that should make you think that this is your life with robotics and automation. You should feel like they actually should be your friends. I mean, think George Jetson and Rosie the Robot and kind of more of that than than some of the more fearful ones. Robotics and automation really can be your friend. And the reason they can be your friend is because absolutely everything you do has a workflow. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about your print shop, the workflow that moves the job from end to end, or the back office workflow. Heck, your house has a workflow, right? I mean, if you think about it, when you get up in the morning, for most of us, we have sort of a usual routine, right? And all the routine is a workflow. It's the things that you do one in front of the other, right? It's all the different tasks that you perform to move forward. So the challenge in business is that people aren't consistent. I mean, maybe you get up every morning and do the exact same thing in the exact same order, and your feet land in the exact same place when you get out of bed, and you put the toothpaste on the toothbrush in the exact same way every morning. But a lot of people vary that a little bit. Oh, sometimes one foot goes down before the other one. Sometimes I do the whole slather of toothpaste. Sometimes I put a little dot on. Sometimes I wash my face before I brush my teeth. Sometimes I shaved and then, all the different things. The order can just kind of based on where you are that morning. Well, unfortunately, when that happens in your office, it's costing you money. And this is the thing that I think an awful lot of printing companies learned as they had to send people home, is that if everybody was doing things slightly differently, their ability to do it from their homes was going to be a little bit interesting. And the idea of having maybe a shorter staff. So maybe we're only letting a few people into the shop, but then we're going to ask them to do other people's jobs, but those jobs were never documented. So we don't actually know how everything it gets done, because there's all these hidden workflows.
Yeah.
So when Ryan and I go in and we do workflow assessments, we start looking for the hidden spreadsheets and the hidden, Post-it notes. My favorite is the ones under the keyboard, right? Where, they've got, the passwords for all the different logins are, on a Post-it note under the keyboard. But then there's the printout of the spreadsheet that's the jobs for the day. Sure, it's in the print MIS. Sure, it's in the scheduling system, but we don't really trust them. And we're pretty sure we know more than the system does. So we have our spreadsheet and we write on it all day long. And then at the end of the day, we go into the last thing we do before we go home, we log in and we update everything. That workflow is just so much money. And so the net of it is that you wind up in a situation where you've got this chaotic workflow and you're not leveraging the software that you've probably actually paid for. And for all of you who sell software, you know the trick. You sell it and you pray to God after the trainers leave, they're actually using it. And for all of you who are printers or work with printers, when you look at the shop floor, that there's software there, but nobody's really sure who's using it, when, and how. So the net of it is that you've got bunches of islands of automation that are doing all sorts of things. And some of it might be a little bit automated. Some of it might be a lot automated. But the data capture and the processes depend on people to make a job move through the shop. And if that job has a problem, it gets even more manual with more people involved and more phone calls. And the killer for me was a data point from Keypoint from a couple of years ago, was that in their survey, 73% of printers weren't even using pre-flighting tools in their workflows. So they might have it installed, but it wasn't a regular part of their workflow. So when we talk about automation, it's all of these things we're talking about automating, right? We're talking about making it possible to take as much off of the plate of the people that we actually have left working in the shop. And that's where tools like, web to print make a lot of sense. All the automated scheduling tools, the automated pre-flighting tools, automating every step of the way. I don't know how many of you spent the last hour with the folks at Heidelberg and their Prenect webinar, but the universal workflow that they were talking about is exactly what we've been talking about for years. It's framework-based, the ability to put tools into the framework as we need them to build out our workflow, with the ultimate goal of being able to take a job in and not touch it again until we're handing it off to the customer or inserting it into the mail stream.
So we basically,
unless there's a problem.
We're talking about cutting out processes. The bigger picture is we're cutting out processes, and a lot of those processes are, okay, I'm ahead of my time. I haven't even seen your slides.
Right. Okay. This is exactly what we're talking about. So, Jean, because I sat with Kayleen doing this with her. The fun thing, Joanne, you'll recognize this one too, because we've used it. So this is sort of one of your standard PowerPoint slides. It's one of the standard PowerPoint templates, but we kind of re-engineered it to walk through a print shop. And this is sort of the cut down version, because the giant version requires a panoramic screen, that almost a wraparound theater to actually identify all the touch points. But and a lot of these have loops. Like if you look at, job ticketing can have loops, and planning and scheduling, all of these points can have loops. But at the most basic point, everybody could probably map their shop or your customers' shops using this. And the problem is they don't understand that every one of those little stopping points along the way is costing them money. And that's why we want workflow automation. We want a workflow. We want a workflow that captures customer intent by kind of making the customer tell us what they really want. And sometimes our salespeople are the biggest bar to that, right? Because if you've got a team of salespeople who are still taking orders on paper in a notebook, and a lot of places are, typically what happens is that the next thing is that it goes to a CSR, who then has to make a lot of phone calls to figure out what the customer's really trying to order. And even if the customer's ordered the same job over and over and over again, they may be rewriting it down every single time. There's no automation. So web to print systems, job capture systems, in manufacturing, we always called them order entry systems. Job order entry systems that automate capture are the fastest and most low-hanging fruit in workflow to automate, to save money. If you can, and every vendor I know has some solution available to you. So you talk to the ones you're already talking to, right? That you're already working with. And for all of you who have them and can hand them to somebody, you know, that it's part of the software solution set that you sell, man, get the job capture automation in there as fast as you possibly can. Because in the end, every point you can automate is money that you're saving, because every touch point costs time and money, right? And so
can you reiterate your stat on the non-engagement of work of pre-flight automation? Was it
73% do not automate pre-flight in their shop.
Absolutely astounding. I mean, that's the biggest. It's unbelievable.
How many don't have a CRM?
So CRMs are funny because they, a lot of people think they have them and don't. A lot of people have them and don't use them. The number of people actually having a customer relationship management system, right? Let's make sure we know what we're talking about. So a customer relationship management system is a database of all of your customer data, their contact data, their financial services data, the marketing data, your touch points with them. It's Salesforce.com and 300 other products that might be out there. The CRM is only as good as the data you put into it. And in more than half of the places I've done assessments, the CRM exists and only has name, address, and financial contacts in it, and does not track marketing touch points or even sales touch points. So Joanne, it's a good question and it's a scary answer. Right?
The reason I ask is because, you know, to Rob's point about being astounded of how many don't automate pre-flight, I'm astounded at how many want to automate the lead gen process, but don't have a place to capture the information because their CRM is an Excel spreadsheet, or it's such a legacy system that more times than not, it has customer information, but nothing on the prospect.
But no job information. And so here's the thing, there are multiple ways to use a CRM system. And you're right, a lot of companies will use it for lead gen management as well as for customer management. And if you look at how Salesforce works, right, that's the one most people are familiar with. That's kind of how it was built to work, right? You capture leads, you get them into the system. It alerts you when you need to do another touch point. It gives you the ability to automate going out to customers. There's a kind of a local US one called Plan Profit that Lemmy's got that I like, because it automates from the minute you've had a touch point with someone. It lets you automate all the communication so that it only comes back and requires a person to intervene when someone asks a question or poses a query of some kind. But the thing about lead management systems and lead gen systems and CRM systems is that most people aren't actually trained on all the features and facets of them. They get installed, and I guess you're supposed to sleep on a magic pillow and learn it, because Nobody takes time to train anybody in them. And over time, Joanne, to your point about legacy, a lot of these were installed maybe 5-10 years ago. Maybe they've put the updates in, maybe they haven't. Yeah, 20 years ago. So my first experience with customer relationship management systems was 1998, 1999. At that time, that was sort of the big buzzword in business in general, was that you had to have a CRM. CRM assumed that you could map your customers into it, your customer data points into it. Gartner had a statistic in 2002, 2003, that more than 80% of the CRM implementation projects that they had been involved in had failed during implementation because the businesses could not identify the data points about their customers because they existed in too many diverse databases that couldn't talk to each other and couldn't be mapped into a fifth generation, a 5GL to be ameliorated into a master CRM. I worked with one of the big telcos on another continent, and at one point they had 83 customer databases.
Yeah, I think
so the question was, which one was going to win, right? If you needed to contact somebody, which one of those 83 databases had the right information about the customer's current address, current telco plan, and current financial status? They didn't know. Right.
So what is the solution, Pat? What's
my solution is this. I want everybody to develop a workflow mindset, right? And it's easy to say and hard to do. We talk to a lot of printers who tell us, oh yeah, well, we're real smart about our workflow. Our production manager is just killer genius. And I think that all those things are true. But I also think that it's very easy to get complacent about your workflow. I think you have to actually do some really hard conversations with your team and hard evaluations. One of the things I tell people is that they need to walk their workflow and do a self-assessment. Before you pay anybody, right? Go do it yourself. Take 3 or 4 jobs, right? And go follow that job from the point where the customer bought it and spec'd it, and be present every place that job goes. Sit with the CRM person, or the CSR person, while they are trying to figure out what that job is supposed to be. Watch how they communicate with customers, the salespeople, and how they move it into pre-press. What screens are they using? How are they updating the business systems to let them know how much this job really is? There was the estimate, right? Now, what's this job really? Follow the job into pre-press and see who's taking how much time to do what. And then follow the job into scheduling and onto the press, into finishing. How many people are touching the jobs? How much time are they spending, and how much are they costing you? These are big questions, and they're hard to answer because every job you walk with is probably going to have a slightly different answer. And at the point where you start to feel like you got it codified, and I'll bring you back to this guy. I'll bring you back to this guy, right? Plot it out, right? See if you can, and anybody who wants this deck, I'm happy to send it to you afterwards. Just drop me a note afterwards and I'll be happy to send it. But this thing, plot it out. Because Joanne, you and I did this for one of your clients, and it was painful because they didn't know.
They didn't know. It was so painful. So
but
painful.
It's amazing, like you say that, but how many print shops do know? And it's only lately that people have woken up to this. Now that it's the big buzzword and everybody's been talking about it, but you take it a while back, no one knew this, and you can't, to make decisions.
And they know it less now. Right? Because the last 2 years they've had to reinvent themselves in order to stay alive. Right? So bunches of people bought brand new equipment. They brought wide format equipment so they could print the floor signs. They bought, they bought additional, inkjet web presses so they could keep up with regulatory mailings that they were being asked to do. They bought direct to garment things so that they could print other, fabric signs. They bought all sorts of stuff. And whether it got integrated into their workflow or not, in most cases, the answer is no. Because they were just so busy trying to stay alive that the software infrastructure, the workflow infrastructure is what suffered the most. The people who already had end-to-end automation and were actually using it found it easier to integrate new products and services with fewer number of people physically in the plant than the people who are doing it all on spreadsheets.
Yeah.
I think to sell to a business owner is not that difficult because you're selling based on efficiencies, which means increased profit once you're more efficient. But the problem is that we don't always sell internally to all the stakeholders, and the stakeholders are the sales reps. They might see CRM as a threat because they're being tracked by a manager who's trying to figure out what they're doing every day. The workflow person might be thinking, okay, I'm going to lose my job in pre-press because it's now automated. If you can sell the benefits to all the stakeholders instead of just the business owners, then you're going to get retention.
But
Well,
again,
that is so perfect.
Yeah. And Rob, I think that's with anything you buy. You go in and you talk about getting a new inkjet press, and all these people go, oh my gosh, we're going to lose our jobs, and it's cutting out people, it's cutting out processes. The discussion today is robotics, and that makes everybody panic because you're going to cut out. You're going to come cut out our jobs and things that we have to do. So I think it's like everything.
So you have to go to the stakeholder and you have to tell them why this is a benefit to your sales rep, benefit to your people on the floor, people in the pre-press, why this will make your life easier, and then you'll get buy-in and adoption.
Yeah. Rob, I did a presentation last year for the one of the Future Print events called "Nobody Died But." And the whole gist of it is exactly what you're saying, is building that consent. One, releasing the level of anxiety and angst in all the stakeholders, that what we're trying to bring in is to make your life better. Trying to identify your unofficial leaders in your group who can be your champions, trying to identify the saboteurs who are constantly going to talk it down. There is a massive amount of people management that goes on in the road to automation that we don't talk about enough.
Yeah.
But in the end,
there are a lot of people internally that would love to sabotage the automation because they want to protect their jobs. So once you get buy-in, you don't get saboteurs.
And so one of the things I like to do is crawl, walk, run. Right. And I've been saying crawl, walk, run, Gene, since our Kodak days. It's because crawl, walk, run is sort of always in the back of my head whenever it's time to integrate a new technology, whatever it might be. I mean, I can remember when pre-flight was new. I'm old. In the end, trying to integrate any kind of technology that's intended to bring efficiency requires in most shops, a crawl, walk, run, talk track. So remember I promised robots? Okay, we're going to crawl, walk, run our way to robots. Okay. You might not think about it this way, but a zero-speed splicer in a lot of ways is a robot. We talk about, maybe you're familiar with the term digital twins. So it's basically metaverse representations of anything from a piece of hardware to a piece of software to a software workflow. These are all sort of the same as robotic concepts, because in the end, what you're trying to do is use technology to become more efficient, right? So all a zero-speed splicer does is reduce the time it takes to change a roll. It's not intended to eliminate the job of anybody on the shop floor. What it's meant to do is two things. It's meant to make it more efficient to keep the press running all the time. It's also meant to limit the amount of contact that a physical person has with a really large roll of paper.
Yeah.
Because Gene and I were talking yesterday. Look, workers' compensation claims in the US and the equivalents around the world in the printing industry are massive. They are typically the result of people not following process, right? And as I said in the beginning, one of the things about workflows and people is that people are not very good at following the exact same process over and over and over and over again and being very efficient at it. Sometimes they make a mistake. Sometimes they think, oh, I don't need to put that belt on. I don't need to do this. I don't need to do that. And people get hurt. So when you start thinking about the ability to keep paper moving without people touching it or limiting the number of touches, that can be really useful. And this is my crawl stage with hardware. You know, just get people used to the idea that automation is okay, right? And you do the same thing with a web to print environment, right? A web to print environment that that forces the entry of all the fields that you need to capture the job data, not the web to print ones that are the free downloads that are a mess, but the ones that are built by solid companies that understand that the goal is to generate a job ticket that you can live and die by, right? Those programs and processes, those are robotics as well. They're just software robotics. So the next step is to start to think about how we integrate what we kind of generally think of as robots, the more physical manifestation of robots into printing. Well, we've been doing this for 15 years, right? I mean, I can remember the first time, Gene, I think it was Rotamail or I think it was Rodalito I went to in Italy when they first got their first AGVs. And so automated guided vehicle, right? And so they had the robots that would go to the warehouse, pick the right paper, right? Which sometimes the people did not. Sometimes when the people went to the warehouse, they would bring the wrong paper to the press. And it wasn't until they finished printing it that they realized they printed on the wrong stock. That all got thrown away. Think about the cost there. You send the robot's looking for a barcode. He's not bringing the wrong one, right? He or she. I don't know the gender of robots. So in the end, they bring the right substrate at the right time to the right location flawlessly, right? So that means that the person who used to do that job can now be released to do something a little bit more valuable, right? Making sure that the right barcodes are on the right boxes can kind of help, but there are all sorts of other things that are more valuable. We can, you know, if you look at this, the image on the bottom left is Cunningham and Bauer. That's one of their AGVs that's designed to go pick up giant rolls of paper. And I think many of us have seen these in action. They're a little scary. You want to stay out of their way. But then we also have the top one is from Yaskawa out of Japan, and the folks at Canon and Horizon at the Horizon Innovation Days before COVID were showing a very similar robot that made basically it sits between the printing process and the binding process to put the stacks of paper that have been offset on the end of the printing device into the binding device one at a time. And it is so consistent because it knows exactly how long it takes to feed. So it's not a person sitting there waiting and doing and maybe dropping the paper along the way. The robot is just very consistent about how it moves. And if you look online for the Horizon Innovation Days video, you'll find it. And out on Inkish, there was also a, excuse me, an Inkish TV story.
Yeah, at Inkish,
right?
We did an Inkish session. They had, I mean, they were basically
brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did the whole robotic line end to end, right? And it was in a book context, right? But there are so many other contexts that it works in. And this top middle one is an AGV, also very commonly used. Actually, there's like Amazon warehouse robots. Amazon, God bless them, whether you love them or hate them, are massively invested in automated guided vehicles, into cobots, where it's collaborative robots working together to pick and pack, right? So they do a lot of that. And the guy on the far right is Gundam. And if you've ever been to Tokyo, you may have met him. He sits at one of the shopping malls. he actually transforms, and I always stick him in there just to remind people that we've been talking about robots for decades and decades and decades, but bringing them into the printing industry, it was initially kind of under our radar. A lot of people were doing it. People who had money to invest in could invest in getting them integrated into their print shops, did it and benefited from it because they always bring efficiencies and, again, can save you from injured employees. There are a lot of things you can do. Please, if you get a moment, the link is here. It's if you go out to Heidelberg and you just search on Heidelberg Robotics white paper. This is just released about right when we were at Inkjet Summit, so about 6-8 weeks ago. Please read this if you're trying to understand how it all integrates together. It's really nicely written and does a really nice job of kind of telling the story. Because I think that what we have to really think about when we think about automation and robotics is how to create a frictionless workflow that allows a job to come in and move through every step with as few touch points as possible, and leverage what physical robots and digital processes and digital automation can do to allow us to basically suck as much cost out of the production of print as we can, to enable high value work and commodity work to exist in the same environment. Because commodity work's not going to go away. Somebody's got to do it, but you're going to have to also have some high value work if you're going to survive, right? So as vendors, the more we can help our customers understand how to build digital and physical workflows that enable that process, that seamlessly handle high value and low value work in the same workflow, the better off it is for all of us. So there's some advantage to creating frictionless environments, because honestly, down the road, some of these guys are going to be your new employees, right? So the walker, so these are actually kinds of robots, right? And they in most cases, robots and cobots are purpose built to achieve a certain task, right? So the walker guy is, there are hotels around the world that use these to greet people as they come in the door. I'm waiting for Walmart to do that. So the cruiser guy is actually very commonly used in hospitality to deliver the things that a person used to deliver to your door. You forgot your toothbrush, you need another towel, you want another pillow. The cruiser robot is actually very well designed for that. The aimbot has more telepresence, so that's a screen on his front, so people can talk to each other kind of the way we are without actually physically being in the same location. And the other ones are just cute. So what does it look like when you're trying to actually implement robotics in the context of a printing environment? I want to suggest that it look, whoops. It's this guy. It looks like this. And I'm going to turn the sound off there. So what you are looking at, and hopefully all your network connections are good enough to see it, is Valpak. The Valpak plant, in the US, we do a lot of direct mail. Valpak is one of the major coupon providers. And what you're looking at is a shop floor where there are almost no people on it. Every once in a while, you'll see a head go by or a person walk across the floor, but they're not actually doing any physical work on the floor. The Dematic robots are responsible for moving rolls of paper to the presses, retrieving printed rolls of paper, finishing those rolls, turning them into coupons, right? Cutting, putting them into a giant sorting environment, which is what you're looking at, and then taking the packets that are sorted and loading them into inserters that then deliver them into the envelopes, which then get delivered into the mail stream. So they have fundamentally automated the entire process from print to insertion into the envelope and placing into the mail containers for delivery into the mail stream, with about 5 people ever involved in the process. Right? It is a massive operation. It was a multi-year, multi-million-dollar adventure, but they didn't have any problems during the last 2 or 3 years getting the stuff out the mail and into the mailbox. And they have only just now, we actually, I own restaurants. We use Valpak services to deliver coupons for the restaurants into the neighborhoods close by. And for the first time in 6 years, they are raising the rates by 0.0018 cents per coupon delivered. And they apologize for raising the rate, but the problem is the postal rate, not their cost of delivery. Right? So
yeah, and if you think about that,
it's an investment.
There's no annual wage increases either. You've got the robots and you need to build that into your costs and stuff. Because, when I went to a print shop in Dubai, newspaper printing plant, and the only person that was there was the guy taking me around. But everything was automated. And you kind
we
of
saw newspapers and magazines do that very early, Jean.
Unbelievable. Yeah. I've had a chat with 2 other people that I try to get onto the show that have actually introduced quite a bit of robotics into their print shops, and they didn't want to, and they didn't want to be mentioned either because it appears they feel
secret
it's
sauce.
Yeah, exactly. That's their competitive advantage. Some sworn to secrecy. But it's funny because both companies came back with the same thing. And I mean, you and I spoke about consistency, and you spoke earlier about consistency. That was a key. You can, if you sit there working out how long this takes, how long that takes, and if you had to cut out processes in that, it was just so much easier using robotics because it was just consistent.
Absolutely. Kelvin, you had a question or a comment?
So the thing is, I mean, we don't quite get the coupon culture that's in America. I figure out what we are, but fundamentally, coupons are discount vouchers, aren't they?
They are. Yeah. So basically, they magically arrive in our mailboxes about once a month. In some zip codes once a week, but about once a month. And inside it, people have paid to have their discount offers all sort of slammed into the same envelope and delivered reliably to a known address.
So my question is, in relation to that, so we don't really have that culture here so much. It is coming through, but it's such a low margin market, isn't it? It's what we call, junk mail, direct mail,
it is
stuff that comes.
It's like door drop mail.
Yeah. I mean, it's such low margin, but for that kind of investment, there must be tens of millions to put into those kinds of machines and workflow. So, I mean, it's a really low. It's on the bottom end of scale for margin, but they've got the highest end of scale for investment. So it must be numbers. I take it works by the volume and numbers. That
it is all numbers for them, and I have had a chance to talk to one of the Valpak people about it. And one of the things they said is that their challenge is the labor shortage. Maybe you've heard of it. Maybe you're experiencing it. More and more, they are finding it almost impossible to find people to work the print shop floor and the inserting and the finishing, right? And when Demian came to them, or Dematic came to them with the concept, so those are all purpose-built robots, right, and AGVs, because they had to design what they had to watch what the people were doing and then figure out a way to make it more efficient and imitate it with this kind of automation. But I've been, Kelvin, in print shops that have made much smaller investments. They've invested in the AGVs that will go retrieve the paper, or they've invested in the robotic arms that will move pallets into place and then retrieve finished work to move to the next station. And everyone I talk to who makes that investment, the first words that they utter have to do with labor shortage. and then efficiency, and then consistency. But labor shortage is, and the other challenge. So 20 years ago, when we first looked at robots, the cost was outrageous. You know, you could spend $300,000 on one. And today, for $50,000, you can get a reasonable robot cobot installation. And if you start to think about what you're paying people burden cost, it starts to look like a reasonable investment.
I chatted to 2 print shops here that have actually invested. Not everything's robotic though, so I would say more towards the finishing, where it's loading the pallets and loading, you know, into the trucks, those kind of things, all robotic. And funny, I mean, the big thing was obviously the cost, the outlay was huge, but both of them kind of came back and said to me, 2.5 to 3 years ROI on that. And they just felt with all the challenges that you experience day to day, that was definitely worth it. And both of them have had it about just a year and 1.5 years, and they wouldn't go back.
It's going to be harder. Hang on, let me turn the sound off on this guy again. So while we're talking, I just want to run this because so you get an idea of what some of the things are that are available in the market today. So Jean, what we all know is that there are going to be fewer people available to work in the future than there are today, right? The labor shortage is going to get worse. It's not going to get better. So this is a video from IREX, which happened in April at Tokyo Big Sight, which I know a lot of you've probably been to. So one of the things that they did, which was kind of interesting, is they invited everyone who makes any kind of robotic to come to the show. And so around the floor, you could see everything from what had been seen at the Horizon Innovation Days, you know, printing process, you know, packing robots, moving things onto presses, moving things into binderies, all sorts of robotic arms. And the interesting thing they did is they did robots and cobots. So cobots are collaborative robots where robots are collaborating with each other to accomplish tasks, or with people, right? Because in some cases it's a hybrid environment, but this is the one that killed me. This is, I mentioned at the beginning, this guy can be solar powered. He was designed for fields, for farm work. He walks because he could step over the rows, right? And his back is flat so he could hold the vegetable containers or the fruit containers. But then he can kneel down when he hits flat areas and he can roll, right? So when you start to look at the innovations that we're starting to see and the sort of intelligence that can be applied, notice nobody's near this. This guy's being managed by a program. He can also be managed by remote control, but you can also get on him and ride him. And well, you know, who doesn't want to ride a giant shiny goat through your print shop? The interesting thing, I mean, it just is like a silly thing, but he's got, if you start thinking about all the things that move around, think about moving ink or toner from your warehouse area into your shop floor. A totally rolling AGV might not be what you want because maybe you have fine turns that need to be made. Maybe there's, you know, plumbing and electrical wires that are in the way. So this is the kind of robotic solution down the road that might be available to handle the tightest of print shops, the smallest, the narrowest accessibility of print shops, because there's a lot of them around the world. And they expect that over time, the price of these things will come down. These guys are probably in the, you know, $300,000 US range, but they'll come down into the one worker FTE cost to acquire. Right. So, and that's what their goals are. Most of these are plug-in battery recharge. The goat thing with the horns also has solar pack capability. They say that more and more of these will become solar rechargeable. Right. So you can plug them in like your EV, or you can plug them in or you can put them out in the parking lot and let them get some sun. If you start to realize how many worker injuries happen in a print shop in any given year, an awful lot of it has to do with lifting and moving either heavy finished work, heavy raw work, or machinery. The investment into one of these things that can actually do that job starts to make a lot of sense. And honestly, do I think this is next year? No. Do I think it's in 5 years? In some shops, sure. Is it 10 years out? Yeah, I think by 10 years from now, it won't be that unusual for us to see, especially AGVs and more of the robotic arms. We already see a lot of robotic arms and motion cutters and all sorts of other applications today. So these guys are just kind of, they're all interesting. And the interesting thing is to watch who's making them. People like Koenig and Bauer are getting involved in this, and all the Japanese companies are getting into it. So
I think that's the bit. That's the interesting bit, is that a lot of companies that we deal with that are machine manufacturers are all now coming, in with these robots. So I think I agree with you. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's happening.
I think it's also interesting, going back to your crawl, walk, run analogy, and you talked about the Great Resignation, and at the top we talked about how many companies are still uncomfortable having the conversation just around workflow, let around robotics. But with the Great Resignation and with the fact that you can redeploy your resources and focus on things like job shadowing, so that you're not dependent on just one person in case, God forbid, that person gets sick or goes away somewhere or something happens. So now you have the opportunity to redeploy and really rethink how you want to use humans in your business to drive more business, as opposed to just doing mindless things that end up, creating mental health issues, creating so many other ancillary issues because of, for whatever reasons. If we can get rid of that. Lee, joined us here. I know Lee from my days in the software industry, and she brought her robot Mindy, and she's using robotics for, I believe you were saying for long-term care. So which is if you guys don't mind, I would love if Lee can speak for a couple of minutes to talk about her. I know that you also worked with robotics at, I believe it was at Orange Gate. So Lee, you have a bit of a history using robotics. I'm really curious what you think about the conversation that we've been having today and how that it jives with your world.
Thanks for asking, Joanne. I've been fascinated by the conversation. I was in the print industry many years ago. So after I left software, I started a marketing agency and did a lot of print brokering. But lately I've been working with Mindy. I call her Mindy. It's an iPal 2 robot. And it's really just looking at how social robots, so robots that can communicate, there's a tablet on the chest. I turned her off because she was interrupting me. It just basically born from my experience. My father passed away after experiencing a form of dementia. And I kept thinking, robots should be able to help. Like, I don't understand how the quality of life and people suffer so much. And the staff that are there are really, trying their best, but they're just overworked and underpaid and all that sort of stuff, right? So in a printing industry, I understand the issues that COVID brought on for sure in terms of staffing, but I think this in general, just finding staff, junior staff in particular, it's harder these days. And as I look at the demographic shift, that's definitely going to come. When it comes to adoption of the technology, it's slow. I won't say that it's like a raging success at this point, because it's not. Retirement homes have a long decision-making cycle, and I'm trying to learn patience. But I also just fundamentally believe that, as a society, we have to figure this out. And, there aren't enough women doing that. So there are a lot of men doing mechanical things with robots. I saw in the chat stuff about, the dogs, Boston Dynamics and stuff. And there's some really creepy robots that are being developed. And so for me, I really want to make sure that robots aren't threatening to humans, and that there are ways that we can use them that people haven't really considered and maybe don't value yet, or maybe they haven't seen, they don't have the same vision that I do in terms of what robots can be used for. But I thought it was interesting. I can't remember who the gentleman was who was speaking earlier. I think it was Rob, talking about, the finding the pain points, or finding, like, why do people, need this? And, it's really hard trying to figure out, is your product, one of my mentors talked about, vitamin versus, oxygen, right? Is it something that's nice to have, or is it something that you need in order to survive? And so right now the robot is like a vitamin. It's like, it would improve the quality of life. It'd be nice to have, but you know what? I need to, hire a housekeeper or whatever, right? So I think that, ultimately, this has been a fascinating conversation for me. I love the videos and sort of seeing what's happening in Japan and whatnot, because I certainly haven't seen all those robots in my research. But yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Joanne. It's been great.
Thanks for bringing Mindy.
Yeah.
Sure.
Any chance we can get like a little demo of like what
Sure,
Mindy can
yeah.
do? I don't know about you guys. I'm just like super curious to meet Mindy.
Oh, yeah.
So she works with a separate tablet. Let me just see if I have my tablet charged up.
Can I get a husband like that and program it beforehand of what I want him to do and say and all those wonderful things? I wonder.
That works.
Yeah, Rick was asking in the chat how to deal with the tech limits of the elderly. Wrote, my 90-year-old father still can't figure out how to place calls on a cell phone. So how does that go?
Yeah. What can I do for you? Maybe is open. Wi-Fi is connected.
So Mindy, if you know how to use a smartphone or a tablet, you can use Mindy. My training for the staff, the robot helpers or volunteers, it's like the robot's not autonomous. It needs to have somebody managing it from a distance. I'm working on a robot management system where we can actually manage like a fleet, with one person managing a fleet, but that's a few years away. But the idea is, it's basically similar to any other tablet with different apps that you have. This robot was initially designed for children, so the songs on it are fairly, like preschool type songs, but you'll be amazed at how engaging they actually are for older adults, because they all sing them to their children or their grandchildren. So I was working with a resident who was fairly catatonic in terms of dementia. She wasn't really severe dementia, but she wasn't very expressive. And I played this song and the robot basically has some pre-programmed that come preloaded. And then I'm also working on customizing more, popular songs. But we started this demo with, I went into the foyer of their home.
If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, stomp your feet.
So hopefully most of you are familiar with that song. So we started that as it was really just the initial meet and greets when I asked, would you like to hear a song? Let me just play the song for you. And I was kind of embarrassed because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's so childlike. I haven't had time to customize any apps yet. And so we started with the woman's niece and herself in the foyer. And by the time the song was over, if you know the versions, it's like people were clapping, stomping their feet and shouting hooray. And I was surrounded by like 12 people and they were taking pictures and video. And they're like, oh, this is so exciting. Oh my God, this is great. And the woman herself, who had been basically catatonic for months, wanted to hug Mindy. She wasn't speaking, like she didn't verbalize, but she was so engaged. You could tell that something had woken in her brain. And it was just life-changing for me. I was like, okay, we got shut down with COVID. Like literally this was like the first week of March, and the second week of March, we were deemed non-essential visitors and the pilot study was canceled and everything. But that basically proved to me that, you know what, I got to keep doing this because I want to see that kind of reaction for people and really support them. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Kelvin, I know you're going to chase us along because I think we've reached the time.
We have indeed. That was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Pat, as always, you were amazing. Jean, you were great. And Lee, thank you very much for that. First time we've had a robot on the pub. That's so
sure. Kelvin, just one thing, if anybody wants this deck for any reason, I'm always happy to share it. I'm like the easiest person on earth to find. You can either ping me on LinkedIn, or pcm@mcgrewgroup.com finds me. If you have trouble finding me, Joanne, Kelvin, Jean, I mean, a lot of you know how to get a hold of me, so I'm happy to share.
I think most of us have already got you blocked on LinkedIn because you're so prolific. So no, not really. No, not really. Anyway,
Thank
that
you.
hour went really quick. As I said, it's the first time we've had a robot in the Crown Pub. Quite a few of us are meeting tomorrow in Birmingham, where we've got an event. It's a nice lunch on a sunny
I'm
day
jealous. I'm jealous. I'm
in a
jealous.
country where
Me
we've
too.
got electricity and alcohol. What could be more perfect?
We got alcohol. We got loads of alcohol.
Listen,
We
we're back
know.
next week. We're back next week, 3:30. Follow us on the Crown Pub on LinkedIn. Let us know if there's anything you want to talk about. Next week, we're talking about procurement. Procurement leads quite nicely on from you, Pat. Procurement is changing in the B2C world. We're seeing Amazon evolve and grow within the market. But in the B2B sector, ERP, CRM systems now dominating it. Printers who don't engage with ERP, CRM systems are just going to lose out. That is now how they're buying print. So SAP, Ariba, Cooper, Salesforce, all those kind of applications.
Interesting.
Oh, go watch that Prenect video from Heidelberg.